Right after Christina ended up in a coma, I left the country. I figured the kind-hearted main guy would take care of her for 5 years. Me? I'm just the evil sidekick. I always knew I wasn't the main character because I lacked the most basic quality of one, being kind. So when I learned how my future would unfold, it didn't surprise me much. The stuff my character does in the story, it's the kind of stuff I'd actually do. In the story, after working abroad for 5 years, I come back. By then, Christina, thanks to the hero's careful care, has miraculously woken up. Frustrated, I cause all sorts of trouble and do a bunch of terrible things, eventually getting what I deserve. When my character exits, someone asks me, "Do you regret it?" The fictional me answers honestly, "Yes." Then, the story ends, painting a picture of karma and eventual awakening. But the author doesn't really get me. I'm Felix, and I've always been someone who keeps going, even if it means hitting a dead end. I do have regrets, yes, but for 2 reasons. First, once I decided to let go, I shouldn't have come back, making things worse until it was hopeless. Second, if I was going to go back, I should have played my cards cleaner, leaving nobody any evidence. As I replayed my life in minutes, I just lay there on the couch, unable to collect myself. The path with Christina was just too hard. That feeling of longing and madness almost swallowed me whole. I felt sorry for the me in the story, and I felt sorry for me too. If a happy ending's not in the cards, maybe it's better not to start at all. A year later, I returned to my home country representing HC Company to negotiate business with a group. I saw Christina again. After everything, she looked thinner and sharper. When she spotted me, her expression changed, staring at me with those deep eyes. During negotiations, her fingers tapped the table unconsciously, a sign she was deeply unsettled. I seized the chance and threw a few questions that left the other side speechless. The situation was in our favor, and we could potentially cut the price by 3%. The opposing group struggled and eventually called for a break in the talks. I smiled as I got up, heading to the break room to relay the good news to my boss. If I could close this deal, I'd earn company shares and become a partner, paving my own path. Once the call ended, I realized Christina had somehow ended up behind me. She stared at me sternly, gritting her teeth. "Felix, you actually came back?" Looking up, I gave a polite smile. Things are looking great here, so of course, I'd come back. Christina seemed really pissed by my slick attitude. Not saying a word, just staring at me with an unreadable expression. Her eyes had so many emotions, and after a while, I heard her softly ask, "Why did you leave me back then?" I quietly looked at her, and she looked right back at me, her eyelashes trembling slightly, wanting to know the answer but scared of it too. For a fleeting moment, I felt a bit of regret but still said it word by word, because I don't want to live with a cripple. Before I could finish, Christina covered my mouth with her hand, sadness all over her face. "Why couldn't you just lie once, Felix?" I chuckled carelessly. "If I'd known you'd wake up, I definitely wouldn't have left." She suddenly pushed me against the wall, voice cold. "You're really not scared I'll kill you?" We stood there for quite a while, and it finally hit me why I'd go back to her in the story. There was something about her eyes that was easily misunderstood, too intoxicating to escape from. After a long pause, a knock on the door broke the tension, and once it opened, we were back to being foes in the meeting. For the rest of the negotiation, Christina didn't attend. I almost effortlessly secured the deal. After the celebration party that night, I headed back to the hotel alone. Standing at the top floor, I looked down at the city lights. I suddenly remembered the first time I came to the city with only a few $100. I didn't dare enter 24-hour shops, so I crouched by the door all night using the lights. Back then, at 18, I swore I'd someday stay at the finest hotel in this city. Now, at 28, Felix had realized all the dreams I had at 18. What more could I want? After all, life rarely gives you the best of both worlds. Most people end up with neither love nor money. The worst situation, wanting both, and that's why my character met such a fate. After working until the early morning, I took sleeping pills and passed out. I still dreamt all night, nothing but memories of me and Christina. I met Christina in the student council. We were both in charge of the same school project. Falling for Christina was easy. For someone like me who struggled all their life, I was naturally drawn to kids who grew up in the sunshine. My life started as a messed up story. My dad married my mentally unstable mom, and then they had my sister and me. I remember when I was little, my mom had an episode and hurt our neighbor. We had to pay $30,000. My dad took my sister and me, knelt outside their door for a whole day and night, turning $30,000 into 10. See, money is crucial, which is why I loved it. Christina and I were fundamentally different. At first, I didn't really plan on anything, even though many guys liked Christina. I decided to make a move when I recognized her simple t-shirt cost more than months of my living expenses. After graduation, I did land a big company opportunity thanks to Christina. You see, I'm that realistic. If Christina had been poor, I wouldn't have considered her at all. And if it weren't for my snobbery, there wouldn't be a story between us. The day Christina became a vegetable, I thought about it all night and eventually left the country without a trace of hesitation. That's the kind of love a person like me can offer. Just one night of hesitation. I chose this path myself, and Felix never regrets. After the negotiation ended, I had to represent the company at a banquet, marking our official entry into a new industry. Before the banquet started, I decided to pick out a dress for myself. It just so happened that city had the largest global store of my favorite brand, so I decided to stop by and pick some clothes. I first discovered this brand on my 20th birthday when Christina brought me here. She blindfolded me, and when the lights shone on me, she whispered in my ear, "Mirror, mirror, who's the most handsome man in the world?" It's obviously our Prince Felix. To be honest, these clothes feel a bit too youthful for me now. A lot of people are surprised by how different my personal and professional styles are. I've thought about changing things up, but I always end up back here. I never expected to run into Christina and the true male lead of this story, Jimmy, here. The boy wore a white suit, looking both elegant and composed, still unable to hide the coldness in my bones. Jimmy comes from a good family, with parents who are surprisingly still in love in this circle. They raised him well, kind, warm, genuine, and brave. Once, Christina helped him unintentionally, so he stayed by her side without complaint for years. I gazed at him lost in thought until those deep eyes locked onto mine. People are definitely different. All Jimmy saw in the mirror was surprise and calmness. 20-year-old Felix, standing in front of the mirror, was filled with desire and discontent. I gracefully greeted them. "Christina, what a coincidence. Taking your boyfriend clothes shopping." I then pointed to the clothes I had just tried on and said, "Wrap up these for me and put this gentleman's clothes on my tab." I was flawless throughout the entire process until the moment I stepped out of the store and suddenly felt a wave of fatigue. After several nights of only 3 to 4 hours of sleep, the delayed exhaustion almost drowned me. But it only lasted a moment, and I returned to my impervious state. At the evening banquet, I gave a speech on behalf of the company. Then, with a glass of red wine, I mingled among different groups. In business circles, there's always some wheeling and dealing. I wandered through these circles, ears and eyes open. On the other side, Christina was introducing Jimmy, shielding him from the gazes coming from all directions. When Christina looked my way, I turned my gaze elsewhere. The room was filled with people dressed to the nines, but inside, it was all underhanded dealings. For example, a person beside me at some point placed their hand on my waist, rubbing incessantly. I fantasized about the satisfaction of pouring red wine on her face, but in reality, I had to maintain a smile. She was the biggest operator of related products in the region, at least for now. I couldn't afford to offend her. If I could secure a ticket into her market and familiarize myself with the process, maybe I could break out on my own. Ignoring the disgust, I waited for the chance to discreetly change my place. Generally, everyone here is a somebody, and most people keep things subtle. But today, this hefty woman escalated things, even following me after I moved spots. She shamelessly handed me a business card with her room number. Climbing up these years, many hinted at shortcuts for instant success, but I've refused them all. Living in this world, there are some lines that shouldn't be crossed. A lesson my elementary school teacher taught me when I'd agreed to let a classmate kiss me for $5. That gentle teacher didn't look down on me, just softly said, "Unless you're at the end of your rope, there are things you can't do. Life is about pride. If it's lost, you're just a shell." Later, he paid for my lunch for a semester and I stumbled through school. He was right. Lose your pride and you're finished. It's through pride that I've survived these years. Lost in thought, her hand unknowingly started traveling downward from my waist. Just as I was about to find an excuse to leave, the person beside me suddenly got kicked to the ground. I looked up to see Christina, eyes burning with anger, staring at me. Apparently, she wasn't finished. As she raised her fist to hit again, I held her back. She's the president of the group. If she hits someone, they'll smile and say, "Good shot." But for me, if things got out of hand, I wouldn't manage. "Enough, Christina. That's enough." She gave me an icy look, grabbed my wrist, and led me to a secluded place before stopping. We locked eyes, but with the light behind her, I couldn't see her expression. Suddenly, she leaned down, stealing the air from my lips in a furious kiss. I struggled, biting down hard, sharing the taste of blood in our mouths. At last, I seized the moment to slap her hard. "What's gotten into you? Are you clear-headed now, Christina?" She wiped the blood from her lips, watching me silently, and suddenly smirked sarcastically. "They all get it, so why not me?" I laughed, breathing softly in her ear. "Anyone else except you. You know it, Christina, I never go backward." Finally, Christina stormed off, leaving me alone in the shadows, staring at the moon for a long time. A perfectly good full moon, shrouded by clouds, hazy and obscure. Christina is like the moon, and I'm just a few dark clouds. What she doesn't know is how petty, vengeful, and cold-hearted I am. Like my dad always said, people who mess with me never end up well. The biggest love I can give her is to stay far away, really far. After some time, I walked alone down a path. I ran into Becky, Christina's half-sister, who's as crazy as I am. Originally, she got close to the main guy to annoy Christina but ended up falling for him herself. In the end, like me, things didn't go well for her either. Becky wore a gentle smile. Those unaware of her real self could easily be fooled. "Funny seeing you here, Felix." I rolled my eyes and said, not too pleasantly, "What do you want?" Her smile faltered for a moment, but then she smoothly replied, "Felix, you're smart, and we have the same goal. Why not work together?" I said nothing, just motioned for her to continue. A not-so-brilliant scheme. I was to keep Christina occupied while she won over Jimmy. Catch them in a compromising position, create misunderstanding, drive them apart, and she benefits. After all, if she really got Jimmy, the company's heir, Becky would have more power in the company. In the story, she actually succeeded. Christina was so mad she left, and the two didn't see each other for 3 years. During those 3 years, Becky genuinely fell for Jimmy, but ended up in a tragic accident, trying to save him. Life is unpredictable like that. You never know how one decision might affect your future, just like in the story, and now her. I looked at her with some pity. "You'll regret this. Karma's a tough road, and who gets away with anything?" She laughed sarcastically. "Since when did you get into Buddhism, Felix?" That was the end of our conversation, not on a happy note. I really wasn't planning to get involved. After all, I never do things without benefit. Yet somehow I did. I had someone keep an eye on Jimmy, but Becky switched tactics, dragging me into the mess. By the time I realized the drink was spiked, Christina had already stumbled and drunk. Using my last bit of lucidity, I tried to leave, but she grabbed my arm. She rubbed her temples tiredly, mumbling, "Am I dreaming again, Boda?" She held me tight, as if trying to meld me into her being. I felt hotter and instinctively leaned into her cool skin. Christina seemed surprised, frozen unsure. "You didn't push me away?" She chuckled dumbly, her eyes shining as she looked at me. If only this dream would last forever. I always loved her eyes, like the whole world was in them. The last string in my head snapped, and I kissed her. "At least tonight, just tonight. Let's not think about anything else. Just savor the moment. After that folly, when I finally regained clarity, Becky had broken in. Christina quickly covered my face with the blanket and looked at Becky with no expression. Get out. Having achieved her goal, Becky left with her crew, all smiles. After everyone left, I stayed under the blanket. It's rare for someone as decisive as me to not know what to do next, hiding like an ostrich. I felt Christina lying beside me, not moving. Then she sighed, pulled back the blanket, and said helplessly, "Felix, planning on suffocating under there to escape responsibility? Good thing my years in the business world taught me to keep a calm face. Just a one-night stand, right? Let's not take it too seriously, Christina." Christina looked intently at me, and I smiled back. She muttered a few okays and suddenly swung a hand, the wind brushing my hair, hitting the headboard instead. "Boda, must it be this way between us?" I tried to smile, but it didn't come. My smile stuck dryly on my face. "We're both adults, Christina. Let's just forget tonight." Christina stormed off, slamming the door, leaving an echo behind. I dressed without emotion, struggling with the shirt buttons, failing repeatedly. So I left them undone, standing by the window, staring blankly at the city lights. Why leap into something doomed from the start? And is it really me Christina loves? Or just her fantasy of me? Memories crept in, consuming me. When I decided to pursue Christina, everything after was calculated by me. When we met again, I was locked in a restroom, all wet and helpless. My gaze was fierce, defiant, unyielding. After that, I'd often show up around Christina due to various part-time jobs, maintaining my composure. Then, I outdid her in a field she excelled, beating her robot in the competition. From then on, Christina's interest in me skyrocketed, always finding an excuse to hang out. But curiosity wasn't enough. Attraction can quickly disappear. So I staged a scene, hiring some people to cause trouble where I worked, acting drunk and hard to please. I intervened and got slapped hard in return. My eyes needed to be red but no tears, lips trembling, yet steady when smashing a bottle down. A resilient yet tough boy, with a hint of wildness, was irresistible to someone like Christina, who grew up under sunny skies. Eventually, I left without saying a word, and Christina chased after me. Under the streetlight, she looked up and saw my face covered in tears. That was when her feelings for me shifted from fondness to genuine liking. You see, isn't it scary? Someone like me even calculates how to show affection. Christina, what would you think if you knew the real me? After that day, I thought Christina, with her pride, wouldn't come looking for me again. But she did, persistently staring at me. "Felix, you owe me an explanation, don't you?" She used the old trick from our teenage years, blocking the entrance to my office with a carefree smile. "If you don't give me an answer today, I'm not leaving." People nearby started to glance our way. Christina held onto my hand, eyes red as if dealing with some huge grievance. Back when we were together, sometimes I'd get so busy with work that I'd forget about her. She'd wait downstairs at my office, and when I'd come down, she'd look up at me all pitifully. "You forgot about me again." I looked at her, smiling through gritted teeth. "Come over, let's talk." Christina dusted herself off and took my hand. "All right, Felix." She started sticking to me even more. Every day, a bouquet of flowers at my office as she demanded I make our relationship official. I felt so helpless that I pretended to have found a girlfriend. The day Christina showed up again, I intentionally tilted my head to brush a girl's lip. From her perspective, it looked like a passionate kiss. Christina still held a bouquet of sunflowers I loved, and they fell to the ground with a thud. I chuckled carelessly. I never go back to old flames. What's past can never compete with the present. She stared at me intensely, as if wanting to poke a hole through my face. Eventually, I managed to anger her enough that she left, leaving a trail of scattered yellow petals. I set up the sunflower persona to suit my image, bright and full of life. But in reality, I'm just a weed growing out of the mud, sapping life from everything around me. I crouched down and picked up the sunflowers, one by one, laughing to the point of tears. Christina, do you know the kind of person you've fallen for? For months, I didn't see Christina until my birthday rolled around. My dad didn't know when my birthday was, and the date on my ID was just something said offhand, so I rarely celebrated it except during the years with Christina. One year, we went to the desert, and she pointed out the stars, telling me, "Felix, your birth is a gift from the heavens, and today marks 99 days together. Every year at this time, I'll be by your side." Not a single person besides Christina remembered the day, so I worked late like always and headed home alone. Opening the door, I found Christina curled up at my doorstep. She was drunk, reeking of alcohol mixed with the chill of late autumn, clutching a cake. Hearing footsteps, she looked up and called out softly, "Felix, don't you want me anymore?" I stood there, staring into her tear-filled eyes, and for a moment, I hesitated. The key turned in the lock, and I snidely remarked as I turned away, "I've got a girlfriend now. What, you want to be my mistress?" In the next moment, everything spun, and Christina pinned me against the wall. Tears welled up in her eyes as she pleaded, "Felix, I don't need anything, just you." She awkwardly added, "Felix, I'm better for you than she is." For a long while, she murmured, "Don't leave me, Felix." I looked into her eyes and leaned down to kiss her. Christina's grandfather owned a traditional medicine shop, so she always carried this bitter herbal scent that felt calming. For that instant, I thought maybe I should give in, see where things lead, good or bad, and give us a shot. Christina lifted her head, deepening the kiss slowly under the streetlight's glow. The next morning, she was in the kitchen cooking. Sunlight streamed over her, casting a picture of perfect serenity. A voice inside screamed for me to turn back, abandon my wicked ways and be better. But I muttered to myself unemotionally, "All results, sweet or bitter, are still results." 5 years later, I was breaking my promise, circling back to old flames. Maybe if we started over, I should be more careful than ever, making sure Christina never finds out the truth. If I can keep it from her forever, well, maybe that's a skill in its own right. Christina and I slid back into an easy routine, neither of us bringing up those 5 years apart. Yet, sometimes, staring at the deep scar running along her body, I drift into thought. 5 years ago, in a car accident, that steel rod pierced Christina's chest. The doctor said it was inches away from taking her life. After the accident, I went to see Christina's mother. Despite the terrible situation, she remained poised and discerning. She could tell at once I wasn't a good person and gave me 2 choices. The first was to marry into Christina's family, taking care of Christina's daily needs while staying out of the family's business affairs. The second was leaving the country while she'd cover my future tuition costs. The catch was, I couldn't get close to Christina again. Like my first day in this city, I sat crouched in the corridor, separated by just a wall from Christina, lost in thought all night. A night of indecision, that's all someone like me could offer in terms of devotion. Then I made my choice to leave for good. I know I'm pretty awful breaking promises like that, wanting it all. In stories, people like me don't end well. But many, myself included, hope they might just be the exception. Sometimes Christina would gaze at me intensely, like she wasn't fully convinced. "Feels like a dream. We won't ever split up again, will we, Felix?" I would always hold her tight, gently reassuring. "We'll always, always be together." Comforting Christina, while comforting myself too. My love with Christina felt like a castle built on sand, ready to collapse at any moment. No matter how careful I was, things moved forward as they were meant to. Becky found me holding some old photos, teasingly saying, "Felix really put on quite a show." The photos were from when I had someone pretend for Christina's sake. Clearly, the evil second lead ended up falling for the main guy, willingly ready to clear everything, including me, out of his way. I looked at her with pity, like seeing myself. "So, what do you want?" She smiled lightly, sipping her tea. "I want Christina's project plan." I thought to myself, Becky is pitiful, talking about interests when it's just her feelings that are still hidden. "Becky, you're so pitiful." I withheld my next thought. "I'm pitiful too, knowing there's no way back. Yet here I am, diving in again. When I got home, Christina was making soup. Christina liked making soup, a mix of time and affection that warms the heart. I hugged her waist, muttering, "What if you find out I'm a bad person one day?" Christina turned and hugged me back, laughing softly, "Felix, I never loved you for your goodness. But what would you do if you found out all you loved was fake?" I had set up a meeting with Jimmy. If the truth was bound to come out, I might as well let Jimmy reveal my ugly reality. Maybe this way they'd have fewer misunderstandings in the future. In just a few days he had lost weight, his eyes looking even larger. He thought he was hiding well behind the column at the next table. I merely smiled slightly, passing him Christina's project proposal. "Don't forget your promise." I chatted aimlessly with him for a bit, figuring Christina should be here soon. Just as I finished my dessert slowly, Christina arrived, sat across from me, and looked at me quietly. Jimmy stepped out angrily, sticking up for Christina. "How could you do this to her? Felix? Even now, he's so kind, no harsh words, only you're a bad person." As he continued, Christina firmly stopped him. "Enough, Jimmy. This is between me and Felix." Jimmy's eyes went red. What's left to say? "Christina, he's been playing you." But Christina just looked at Jimmy earnestly. "Boda has gone through a lot. It's my fault I didn't give him enough security." Jimmy left, leaving only me and Christina at the table. Though I was in the wrong, Christina's tone was full of apology. "I'm sorry. I should have realized sooner that you needed this." I stared at her, feeling unexpectedly sad. It was the first time I wished we had met without deceit and schemes. But let's end things here, at least for now we have some good memories. Young Felix and Christina, always in love without lies or deceit. Christina loves me so much, it's even hard for me to lie to her now. Christina looked at me nervously, and I suddenly laughed out loud. "It's all fake. Don't you get it?" I placed the photos Becky painstakingly collected on the table, laughing harder, like it was the funniest thing ever. Since our first meeting, everything was calculated. It was all about making you love me. It wasn't real. "Do you know who I truly am?" Christina looked at the photos, shocked. I got up and left, not looking back. What a mess. It could have ended well, but here we are. Before I knew it, tears covered my face. As I turned a corner, footsteps approached. I stopped, heart racing, then turned to find myself in a warm embrace. Christina smiled up at me, like she did when she first introduced herself years ago. "Boda, I've decided. I like you, all of you. Many people like your good side, that's nothing special. I like both your good and bad sides." I glared at her, pushing her away. "Christina, this is your last chance. If you don't leave, I'll keep you by my side forever. Are you ready?" She kept smiling, couldn't ask for more. I pulled her close by her tie, kissing her. "You're done for, Christina. I'm showing you my true self, bare and all. And if you choose to stay, I'll never let you go. Ready for a second lead's love?" Later, Christina took me to meet her mom, Wendy. Surprisingly, she wasn't angry at me, just sighed and said, "Christina, it'll be tough for you. He loves the world more than you. You'll always come second." Christina just glanced at me. "I just need to be there when he looks back." Then she looked at me. "Let's talk." Christina seemed worried looking at me. I squeezed her hand lightly, signaling everything was fine, and followed Wendy into her study, feeling slightly anxious standing beside the bookshelves. Wendy, the legendary entrepreneur from City A. I actually saw her many years ago, on the day when Hope Primary School was inaugurated. For a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of life beyond the mountains. After the event, as an outstanding student, I received a scholarship which eventually helped me leave the mountains. That day, she stood on stage with such confidence, and the way she commanded was imprinted in my mind. For many years, Wendy was my inspiration. Much later, Wendy turned and looked back at me, holding an old photo in her hand. "The situation is very favorable for us. We can likely lower the price by another 3 points, she said. "This is Christina's father." Folks outside say Christina's father was outwitted by Wendy and died unhappy. Wendy supposedly used Christina's father's inheritance to build her empire. Wendy looked at me and smiled. Curious about my story with Christina's father? I nodded honestly, and then she slowly told me an old story. The story wasn't anything special, just a classic tale of a country boy and a city girl. A bittersweet love story. Christina's father loved me, but back then, I was all about my career. I offended the local powerhouse, and in saving me, Christina's father stayed forever in the river. She looked up at me and spoke quietly. The reason I didn't approve of you and Christina back then is because you're like me. You're the kind of person who can't really bring happiness to others. I kept silent because I couldn't argue against it. I wasn't sure if I could actually make Christina happy. Wendy looked at me and suddenly laughed. But love is a matter best known to those in it. When Christina looks at you, there's happiness in her eyes, and that's enough. Christina loves you, and I'm glad I now have the ability to allow her to be with the person she loves without compromise. To be honest, Christina isn't suited for the business world. I've sheltered her too much. She's righteous and straightforward. Perhaps you are more suited than Christina. I was a bit stunned, and while in a daze, I found a jade bracelet slipped onto my hand. This bracelet was something I came by accidentally. With it, I made my first fortune. Felix, I admire your ambition, but sometimes I want you to look back at those behind you. Jimmy and Becky are together now. On the day Christina chose to stand by me without reason, Jimmy finally gave up. In the bar, as he cried and laughed, Becky stayed with him all night. And he finally realized that instead of chasing someone blind to him, he should look at the ones beside him. And I later found out Becky wasn't actually Christina's father's child, but rather, it was one big lie from Becky's mother. After escaping this lie, Becky seemed much more at ease. Many years later, I returned to the mountain I came from. Like Wendy, I passed on this ambition or hope, whatever you may call it.